Hello and welcome to round one with Jeskai Control. I'm Ari Lax, and looking at this hand, I'm not a huge fan of it, but having more lands is better. I think that being land light is more likely to cause issues with this deck than flood, especially when we have a creature land in our hand. And specifically, this hand has negate to stop a Gideon. So one of the threats that you kind of might need more action to power through is already handled by your hand. So I was fine with keeping this. I mean, I'd probably keep most hands that look kind of like this, but it's more like it gives you the warm, fuzzy feeling of this hand's probably going to do something good. So on the play, pretty clear tap land on one. Opponent leads on a mountain, no one drop. Port Town revealing land, not a ton of complicated stuff here. And we're going to use negate on this copter. I kind of put my opponent on zombies here. And worth noting that the zombies deck, copter is probably the best thing to target. You're trying to hit their discard outlets, their card advantage generating stuff. And I guess hitting Tormenting Voice might be a little better. But I think taking out copter even in the long run is better. I'd rather save the glare to... I'd rather use the imposition answer where I then have mana up to flexibly use glare later than be forced to glare the copter on 2 turns later and then have to lose my glimmer mana if I top deck a glimmer. I just want to leave my mana up, leave my options open, and not be forced into a play later. Torrential Gear Hulk's probably the best possible card to draw right there. We get Bomat Couriered. And I thought about this, and I glared it on the spot. Mana efficiency, I also just didn't want this card to build up and potentially give my opponent, a rebuy hand. And us getting flowed kind of confirms, Andrew Shroud did finish in 17th at Knoxville with Bomat Courier and Smuggler's Copter alongside... Holdaran Pariah and Haunted Dead in those cards, but the Incendiary Flow kind of gives away that this is kind of traditional, just black-red aggro. We do nothing because we have nothing. And our opponent's just kind of launching burn spells that was an Alms of the Vein at our face, which is a pretty good sign for us. We only have a single red here. We don't want to spend it on attacking for 4. And being able to block a haste creature is kind of nice. And this combat's going to get a little interesting. So, I get to animate. And so I want to talk this through. So you'll notice that I have to, imagine that this is going to die. I do have to use my last red source here. And then if this gets killed, I'm going to be out of red mana, except for the part where the Harness Lightning on the 3/2 that I would cast in response to whatever kill spell leaves me with an energy to leave me extra red up. So that's kind of key. And also this block, the big deal for it is that if this gets killed with something, I actually have baited an answer that would target the Gear Hulk, which is kind of nice if I'm trying to establish some sort of advantage. And basically exactly the best case scenario happens. My opponent uses an unlicensed disintegration. We fire back with the Harness Lightning to not only, rectify our mana situation, but also gain 3 life virtually instead of getting burned for 3 off the disintegration, because our opponent no longer controlled an artifact. And also worth noting now, we have a proactive thing that we can Torrential Gear Hold. Worth noting, there's no need to anticipate main phase there. If I wanted to hit a tap land off it, potentially I might, but here, just obviously leaving the Hulk up is better. Further anticipate, just so I can get value on the Hulk later. This is a pretty clear Void Shatter over 2 random cards. The taxing counter is going to get worse over the game, and there's not enough creatures for Radiant Flames. Second Hulk is great. And here, I think I make a slight error. I let my opponent untap. And I think I was actually supposed to just Gear Hulk, Flashback, Harness Lightning on the 3-2. So that I can't get disintegrated and take 3 damage. So I Hulk. I just make the play I was going to make. This gives me an additional virtual, floating energy. And I take this 3 damage here because I mess up my timing. Just 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Worth noting, my opponent has no creature for the Scrounger, and we can counter any creature with Void Shatter. With 4 cards in their hand, it's probably just a bunch of burn spells, or lands or whatever. And we now have 9 for Hulk plus counter up, which is pretty huge. We're going to Hulk back the Anticipate. Because we can get value off of it, I actually want to cast the Hulk. If I wasn't getting a 2-for-1 value on it, I'd probably just wait. The deck, I am playing against kind of a burn deck, but at the same time, it's not as aggressively burny. You aren't so forced into... often against burn, the control deck, just in other formats, is forced down these lines of having to clock its opponent in order to prevent them from drawing burn spell to burn spell to burn spell and killing you through counters. And the standard black-red deck does not really have that same inevitability. And this third Gear Hulk is basically... I don't think there's any way for my opponent to come back. I have 3 hard counters in hand, a super fast clock. I use Void Shatter here to prevent my opponent from getting back the scrap heap. Just sit on the other Gear Hulk because I'll just flashback something with it eventually. Pretty straightforward, Same thing. Best thing to do is exile that to keep the Scrounger off the battlefield. I still have another counter spell up. Opponent throws a couple of irrelevant burn spells at my hand, or my head. Look at 1 card in hand, 5 life. There's no single card that can do that in standard, let alone my opponent being able to do it twice. And they concede the game in the face of death by 5/6. Okay, so sideboarding. Taking out 4 sweepers is pretty obvious here. My opponent's on just like random stuff like Scrap Heap Scrounger. I don't really care. Like Bomat Courier. There's just not enough creatures in my opponent's deck to really push as hard as I want on the sweeper angle. I ended up boarding in the Negate, counters discard spells, counters all that other stuff. I did Brutal Expulsion specifically kills Scrounger, but I don't really like it against all the other cards in my opponent's deck. It's just really inefficient. Blessed Alliance, obviously, against the burn deck, just coming in immediately. Dismissal's a little too slow. Spell Queller dies to Fiery Temper that my opponent's going to leave in their deck and probably Incendiary Flow, so I'm not really happy with it. And I wanted a couple Gideon, but not a ton. And a Linvala. So these are the first 5 cards I looked at. I had 4 cards coming out, and then I kind of looked through again. I realized that Revolutionary Rebuff, the cards my opponent's playing early are aggressive artifact creatures, and then by the time it's late, they're going to be able to position around a taxing counterspell with their burn spells. So I took those 2 out and put another Gideon in. And this is the configuration I ended up with. I'll split it up real fast across the different categories so you can just kind of see what's happening. I cut down on removal because my opponent's deck's a bit more creature light. Counter count and stuff's pretty similar, but I did push up on threats so I can actually kill my opponent. It's worth noting that Gideon can hold off a Scrap Heap Scrounger for quite a while. Okay, so we're on the draw game 2. And this is basically an example of why I hate these decks. You have these hands where you're like, oh, I've got some interaction, only 2 lands, no way to bridge the gap, some expensive spells. And you're just like, well, if I miss my lands, I'm going to die, and if I hit my lands, it's going to look really seamless. And this is, there was a Chris Bakula quote from Draft Camp of Kaladesh where he says the worst part of Magic is 2 landers on the play and limited, and this is basically the same thing in Constructed. These 2 landers with control decks are just, ugh. Just not happy at all with these. And you just like, it's either going to look like nothing's wrong or it's just going to be not a game. So tap land's pretty obvious. My opponent plays Scrounger and puts us to 18. And we're kind of in hope and prayer for a land mode. We get Transgress and our opponent takes our Void Shatter. And here, I have the option of Bless the Lines, let my opponent sack something, or Harness. And I determine that the right play is Harness on the Scrounger to minimize the amount of damage I'm taking here. And the other idea is that if I Alliance, like I'm putting a creature in the graveyard, and then when I kill the Scrounger, you know, I'm going to be forced to do that to kind of get into the point where I'm activating Gideon profitably, whereas I might be able to strand this Apprentice of 1/2. And if I use both of these, the Scrounger's just going to be coming back anyways, whereas this, I might have the Scrounger stuck in the graveyard for some amount of time. So I end up harnessing the Scrounger, minimizing the damage on this turn, making my opponent a little less able to fight back, but they have this, the Insolent Neonate to set up an immediate rebuy of the Scrounger, or near immediate. Land's a pretty important draw, even if it's not the one I was looking for. There's another Neonate entering. I fire off the Alliance because I want to stabilize the board as much as possible before I cast Gideon, and Alliance is going to make my opponent sack like Scrounger or something later that they're just going to get back, so I'm actually getting something out of this. So they sacrifice that there, they sacrifice Insolent Neonate that they just cast to draw and discard. They were going to initially use it to get back Scrounger to pump this up, but because of the way things played out, they lost their attacking one as well. So they alms me off the Madness, get back Scrounger to pump this up. And I just hate Magic right now. That's basically the only way you could feel here. Oh, look, all these not lands that we can die when we draw. And literally nothing we can do. This game is over. So for game 3, after looking at game 2 a little bit, I swapped out one of the Immolating Glares for a Radiant Flames. It does make me a little worse against Smuggler's Copter, but at the same time, I wanted to be able to mop stuff up if I'm trying to protect Gideon from, you know, menace creatures or whatever. And Glare just... I'd rather have the gain 4 off Alliance in this matchup was my logic on cutting that removal spell. And obviously, Harness Lightning is just better. So this hand is similar to the one we had game 1. Not great, but it will keep us in the game for long enough to potentially draw something. Our opponent balls, which is nice, but not insane. You know, we're going to play a long game where they can come back off the card disadvantage. So random crappy creature, we play it on tap land. Leave up Glare. I fire Harness Lightning so I can have the energy floating in case I need it later. And I think the Glare is going to take out something at a later point anyways. It can take out a Copter. And also this guarantees a proactive card in my graveyard for Torrential Gearhulk. Also worth noting that, not something I even realized until now just watching the replay, but if I keep Harness Lightning and I want to kill the Neonate or whatever, for whatever reason, you know, I am down the extra energy off of it 100% because they can sacrifice the Neonate in response. So you take a hit from the crappy beatdown machine, fire off a negate on Smuggler's Copter, glad to make that trade 100% of the time. Only really get punished there by like it Transgress the Mind. Here I realized I just played the wrong land. I should have played the Aether Hub, kept the Plains. This is just basic knowledge when you're playing with the Shadow lands in a format. Hold on to your basics until your last possible moment if it's not messing up your on-tap land status. Because now if I draw a Port Town, I in theory couldn't have an on-tap land every turn. So I end up harnessing here to buy a little bit of time. I think think it's possible I should have glared, and I thought about this at the time, but just having the like reactive answer in my hand versus the proactive one might have been a little better. So we lose a Gear Hulk to a Transgress. I fire and anticipate to try hit a tap land main phase. Ship a quarantine field I'm not super concerned about. I'll find it out to this Scrounger. Now I pass with mana up, see if it affects my opponent's plays. They fire another Transgress, and now we are just out of threats right now. So we have to pull back into a position where we're able to swing the game and push forward, because I don't think Wandering Fumarole beatdown's going to get us there. Fortunately, we hit Gideon off of this immediately. And I just start the proactive Gideon train. This plus on the Gideon, by the way, the logic is that if I make a 2/2, my opponent can menace through it and put this to 3, and then have land, Fiery Temper, or just Incendiary Flow to kill it. About the most awkward thing possible happens, which is Bomat Courier, attack Gideon, and Fiery Temper. So if we left it at 4, it was dead, but we would have at least had a 2/2. But it's kind of hard to foresee Bomat Courier plus land, just all this stuff happening. We immediately draw another Gideon, and I wait to be able to actually protect it in some reasonable way. We can fire off, Blessed Alliance to gain life and kill a creature that's attacking. We have a blocking Fumarole that threatens the Courier. Key of the City is a little obnoxious. I opt for the expensive one, so I'm going to make my opponent sacrifice one of these. I don't think Courier is super important here with the Key to the City. My opponent's going to be returning cards anyways. So just getting, this Blessed Alliance, especially against Key, I kill a creature now, whereas later I'll be able to kill the creature that my opponent makes unblockable to get through to Gideon if I have a mana up. Whereas, if this is just target player sacrifices attacker, they might sacrifice the random creature that's going to get blocked. And here them keeping the Courier is really nice. So I stick Gideon, make a knight. Opponent gets back their Scrounger. And they drew Fiery Temper to finish the Gideon. Which is unfortunate, but it happens sometimes. So here, I get to play Jace. My opponent's Hellbent. The odds of them drawing something relevant to kill it in one turn are low, and they only have 5 power to my 6 loyalty. And I get to keep a Nahiri to potentially exile, a 3/2 or a Key to the City, or just really anything, because I need to be able to kill things to get back into the game. Opponent's now figuring out where they're sending everything. That is probably one of the better draws. And so here, I believe, is the interesting scry. So I hit a Anticipate. And my immediate reaction is exactly what I was talking about in deck build, which is that I just don't have the mana at this point in the game or for the next few turns. By the time I get the mana to actually slot in and Anticipate, I feel like I should have full control of the game or be dead. I don't really need it right now. And so here, I get to do some crazy stuff. So, Radiant Flames. My opponent makes a slight misplay. So, what they should have done, what they're going to end up doing here is they go Neonate and then Key, so they're just dumping all their cards and then using the Bomat to the maximum number of cards. But what they ended up doing was neonating and resolving the neonate first, when instead they should have sacrificed the Bomat Courier in response. Though I guess this way they have a little bit more knowledge over whether they want to get the 4 cards off Courier or they want to scrap heap Scrounger. So I guess there's slight reasons for what they did. But this sequence out of them lets me get 2 Planeswalkers on the battlefield unopposed Exiling the key puts me up a card and potentially lets me stabilize with blockers. But they have another key. Not horribly against what happened here, but Scry with Jace. There's a backup Nahiri, which I keep because I can bait some attacks into my existing Nahiri, potentially shatter the key or whatever. Just the backup exiles are actually going to be very important, I think, moving forward. I fire a Glimmer to kind of figure out what I want to do here. Hit a Shatter, great. Hit another Glimmer, great. And the sequence was I wanted Jace first, and then Glimmer. I think that's the maximum amount of info about how I want to use my mana. And then I Nahiri once I have, I didn't want to discard any of the cards in my hand at the time. I don't even want to discard any of these cards now, but potentially I could Glimmer into a card I want to discard. So Scrounger, there are a bunch more creatures to Scrounger back at this point, so we're going to have to deal with that until we exile it. It's pretty clear, kill the thing, save the Jace. Not a lot of thought to that. I guess at this point I do know my opponent doesn't have a burn spell because my creatures or my planeswalkers would have been dead. Obviously send the random extra land to the bottom, draw Gear Hulk. This game's pretty locked up. At the point where I've not discarded cards 2 turns in a row to Nahiri, I can't imagine anything going well for my opponent. And just double checking Graveyard real fast. They get back Scrounger, whatever. They do a thing, whatever. I'm at 1,000,000 life. I don't really care. At this point, it's just a matter of ensuring that I maintain my onboard Planeswalker advantage. And this baits the pretty nice attack into Nahiri. Which I'm fine taking. I can, counter something later. I just want to use this Nahiri to exile this, and from that point, I should be able to take full control of the game. Here I get to Glimmer, leaving up a counter spell. My opponent goes for a value Fiery Temper. I counter, and they actually concede the game at this point. But if I had another turn, what would have ended up happening was I would have minus Nahiri on the key, and then cast the other Nahiri and minus it on the Scrap Heap Scrounger. And, well, I would have minus on the Scrounger first in case my opponent did something silly like Galvanic Bombardment in response and get it back or whatever. But just exiling all my opponent's permanents seems a little better than resolving Gear Hulk. But they decided that their hand was just full of air, and they were done playing against multiple active Planeswalkers and all of their permanents being exiled. Not shocking. Standard control win condition of your opponent gets sick of losing.